Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Susie Stern, and I'm privileged to be a board member of JDCA and the programming chairman. And I would love to welcome you today for today's program, Reproductive Freedom in Crisis, a Jewish community conversation about abortion justice, featuring an extraordinary panel, Senior Advisor to the Director of the White House Office of Public Engagement, Sherice Perry, Slate Senior Editor, Dahlia Lithwick, activist and Jane Collective founder, Heather Booth, and National Council of Jewish Women Scholar in Residence, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg. Friends, our world changed dramatically last Friday when the US Supreme Court stripped millions of American women access to abortion, which had been protected by law for nearly 50 years. As Jewish Americans, our tradition makes it explicitly clear that the health and well-being of the mother supersedes all else. And we also know that more than 4 out of 5 Jewish Americans support abortion access. For me, this decision is very personal. As a woman, I am profoundly aggrieved by this extremist and unfair ruling, which is antithetical to our Jewish values and frankly, to our values as human beings. I remember life before Roe was law. I know the horrors that lie ahead. Women will die. And I am deeply concerned for the safety and well-being of millions of women who will no longer have bodily autonomy according to this extremist Supreme Court. Women will continue to get abortions, we know that, but they will not be safe, and many will die unnecessarily because of this ruling. This reversal of historical and legal precedent is a betrayal of our values, and we are determined to do everything in our power to ensure that abortion access remains safe and legal in the United States. And so we must all act. As the only national organization dedicated to mobilizing Jewish voters in support of Democrats who share our values, JDCA's mission has never been more critical. And we urge everyone to join us in ensuring that this decision is effectively overturned in the midterms by electing more pro-choice Democrats this fall. I heard Senator Klobuchar yesterday say, "Get mad and go vote," and I couldn't agree more. I now am pleased to hand it over to JDCA's CEO, Haley Seufer, who will facilitate today's program.
Thank you, Susie. I'm Haley Seufer, CEO of JDCA, and I'd like to welcome you to today's community conversation on reproductive freedom and abortion justice. Donald Trump has left an abhorrent legacy of an extremist right-wing Supreme Court that is clearly not representative of the will of the majority of the American people. The ruling to overturn Roe has reversed half a century of safe legal abortion in this country and is appalling to Jewish Americans, 83% of whom support access to abortion, and we are outraged. It has never been more important that we come together and organize in support of reproductive freedom and abortion access and advocate for change. And we are grateful to our panel of experts for being with us today to share their insight. Joining us today is award-winning journalist, legal scholar, and Supreme Court expert Dahlia Lithwick, as well as longtime activists before the Roe ruling and founder of Jane Collective, Heather Booth. We are also joined by faith leader and scholar Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, who continues to organize Jewish leaders of all denominations to protect abortion access and fight for change, as well as Sherice Perry from the White House Office of Public Engagement, who will offer insight as to how the Biden administration is approaching this issue and supporting our communities. So first, we will start with Dahlia. I'd like to kick off today's discussion by making sure that we're all on the same page and better understanding the decision that we saw last Friday. And Dahlia, you have been watching the Supreme Court and writing about the court for 22 years. There is no one who knows this better than you. So Dahlia, what are the key arguments that were underpinning the majority opinion in the Dobbs decision?
So first, thank you, Haley. Thank you to JDCA, and this panel is like rock stars. It's a thrill to be with you. So I think the short answer is that the big arguments that underpin Justice Alito's majority opinion in Dobbs are, Roe v. Wade, and its progeny, Casey, Planned Parenthood versus Casey from 1992, are wrong. Roe was egregiously wrong from the day it was decided. They argue that Roe and Casey have caused immense polarization and strife and conflict in the United States. And the best thing we can do to calm the waters is return the issue of abortion to the states and let the states regulate abortion as they see fit. The court says that the substantive due process provisions of the 14th Amendment, so the 14th Amendment has an equal protection clause and a due process clause. The due process clause has been modified over the years to include privacy, liberty, bodily autonomy, familial integrity protections. That's all under the sort of basket of substantive due process. But the majority says that's almost all just judge-made law, and abortion itself is nowhere protected in the Constitution. And then they impose a new test, and the test for all of these unenumerated liberty rights is plucked from another case called Glucksberg that had to do with physician-assisted suicide. And that case says that going forward, no unenumerated rights will have constitutional protection unless they have a long-standing tradition and history of being protected in the United States. And then he just goes on to sort of cherry pick some history to suggest that abortion has always been criminalized from before the founding, after the founding. All of us that believe that quickening was the benchmark for criminalization are just wrong. There's a little discursion into stare decisis precedent of the role of upholding cases because they've been upheld and people rely on them. And Justice Alito just compares this to Plessy versus Ferguson and says that like Plessy, which was an atrocity, so is Roe. And then he says women can vote. So you can vote, and if you don't like it, go to the state house and exercise your legislative power and your electoral power, because frankly, the court can't predict how this is going to turn out and shouldn't have to. And then I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but it goes on to explicitly say that those other unenumerated rights, the things that are not protected by name, including Griswold versus Connecticut, the right to contraception, Lawrence v. Texas, the right to have intimate sexual relations with the partner of your choice, and Obergefell, marriage equality, those are not on the table for reasons he doesn't tell us exactly, but he more or less says they don't involve the taking of life. Then he takes a punch at the concurrence, he takes a punch at the dissent, and then that is sort of the basis, the predicate for the overruling of Roe.
Well, thank you. Okay, now that we understand the majority opinion, perhaps more importantly, this was quite a remarkable dissent. The fact that you had the three justices write this together and just the what they shared in general. So if you could summarize for us the dissent and also some lessons that we may learn and take from it to guide our activism in support of reproductive rights.
I would say, Haley, the most important thing, and you're quite right, this is a pretty singular dissent because it's co-signed by all three of the dissenters. And I would say one of the singular lessons I take from it, and it is front and center in the dissent, is that this decision almost entirely ignores women, the lived lives of women, their economic interests, their bodily interests. They're just invisible. This is a long, dusty jaunt through history books, through, 18th, 17th century legal scholars, some of whom were in favor of witch burning and didn't believe that a man could rape his wife. All of that is more important than the lived lives of women, and that really is very much centered in the dissent. The other thing that the dissenters talk about is what the very nature of a fundamental constitutional right is. You don't kick it back to the states. That if we learned anything from Brown v. Board, it's that if a right is fundamental and constitutional, it is protected everywhere, and it's not up to the vagaries of state legislatures to protect them. it raises, and I know we're going to talk about this too, really the parade of unanswered questions that arise after you just scupper 50 years of on which people have relied. Questions about what happens with ectopic pregnancies now, what happens with Plan B, we're already seeing is at issue, what happens with basic birth control, which also theoretically involves the taking of life if you use fetal personhood. What do we do in cases of rape and incest? They essentially just say this opens a Pandora's box, it doesn't close it. And then maybe most importantly to your question of it signals about what we should be doing, it's very clear that this requires massive, massive focus and attention in a way that we have not given attention to the issue. And so, you know, again, I know we'll get there toward the end, but it's going to require things like paying attention to state and local races. It's going to require looking at gerrymandering and figuring out why we have so many non-competitive races. It's going to require vote suppression and understanding why this Supreme Court has been a part of suppressing the vote for a decade. And it's going to involve, and I think this is important, meaningful and robust federalism, which means states putting into effect robust protections where they can, not just so that pregnant people can travel from other jurisdictions and receive care, but that physicians and providers in their state can provide care without being hailed into court in Texas or Oklahoma. And maybe the last thing I would say is that what I get from the dissenters, and I think this is actually existential, is a kind of cri de coeur about the illegitimacy of the court. It is almost an elegiac dissent insofar as it signals very, very strongly that in one fell swoop, and you can see it throughout the cases we've seen come down in the last few weeks, the court has essentially put a torch to its own legitimacy, and that it is going to be something that is almost impossible to claw back.
Thank you. I would now like to bring in lifelong organizer and political activist Heather Booth. Heather has a long history of shaping the American political landscape through activism and organizing, including for abortion rights. She was the founder of the Jane Collective, an underground abortion counseling service before the 1973 ruling of Roe v. Wade. So Heather, thank you for joining us. As an organizer and activist before abortion was legal in the United States, can you please share with us what it was like at that time? And given that experience, what do you believe are the best actions that we can all take to protect women seeking abortions in this post-Roe reality that we are now all in?
Among the things that we can do, and I'll come back to this later, is exactly what you're doing. That the Jewish Democratic Council of America even exists, allows us to have a voice. That's what we need to do, is to raise our voices. Dahlia, to share her information. I have followed her in her written word and her spoken word, and good to see her on this Zoom now. And Susie Stern, Holly, you, I look forward to hearing Rabbi Danya later. And all of those who are listening in, it is up to us to make the future in this history-making time. And we Jews know about history-making times. And it is our entire tradition, our legacy, our history, our training, our teachings that tell us that in the times of crisis especially, it is justice, justice we shall pursue in an activist way, an organizing way. And when we've organized, we have changed this world. And if we organize now, we will change this world. For what life was like before Roe, women's lives were in danger. Women weren't equal participants in the society in many ways. And this is just one indication of the disrespect for women. There were septic abortion wards in hospitals where women who had done injury to themselves or others had done injury to them were sent. Many did die. Many were injured. Many had more limited lives. To have a child you're not ready for means that you are more likely to live in poverty, less likely to continue in education, less likely to raise a happy family. There was just a study out about that a week or so ago. So that those elements of what life was like are what could be part of our future. Now, in that situation, because you mentioned Jane, I tried to provide a service for a friend who was in need, just out of a good deed, wanting to help others as I'd want to be helped. I've never had to face the situation myself. And I found a doctor for her who performed the abortion. More and more people came through and were looking for abortion services. And we set up a system because 3 people talking about abortion was a conspiracy to commit a felony. Again, that's what's returning. In fact, right now, as Dahlia partly implied, in Texas and in Oklahoma, you get a bounty. You can get $10,000. Even in Oklahoma, they talked $100,000 if you turn someone in. It's like we're turning into some authoritarian state. And that in the face of that, we told people to ask for Jane. Over time, the women of Jane performed themselves 11,000 abortions in a caring community. It was safe, but it was not legal. And now we have to ensure that it stays legal, but because people organized, Roe became the law of the land because we did turn out those votes. And that's the key to what we need to do now. So you ask in the last part of your question, Haley, what should we do? There's so many things to do, and each person will find their own thing, whether it's cultural aspect, writing, speaking, organizing, lobbying, doing legislation. But there are 4 M's that I emphasize, 4 M's. Members. We need to recruit people to vote, to register, to turn out. We need to make the person-to-person contact. We need to build organizations and build Jewish Democratic Council of America. We need members. 2, we need the message. We need to say the words that will be persuasive and talk to people in language that talks about them. Right now, 1 in 5 people who can have a child will have an abortion. It used to be 1 in 3, then 1 in 4. It's now 1 in 5, both because of contraception, but also because of the limits in what's legally allowed. That means it could be your sister, your cousin. It could be you. It may have been your mother at some point, because the majority of people who have abortions are already parents. They know what it means to have a child. So we need to talk in terms of a message that connects with people and send that message on social media, on writing, on forums like this. So members, message, and money. We need to raise the money. We need to provide the support. There's often this dark money that's coming in on the other side because it's been made a partisan political issue for the right wing, the MAGA section of the Republican Party. But we need to also raise our money. And then movement. We need to show up. We need to protest, raise our voices, and particularly drive it into the elections. And I'll end with this. If we had 2 more senators and held the House, just think of what we could do. President Biden today said he is for overturning the filibuster, at least for the question of reproductive freedom. That even could be extended. But for that, we need 2 more senators. We need to hold the House. And we need to do that also at the state and local level, and to live our Jewish justice values. And then when we organize, we will change this world.
Thank you so much, Heather. We are inspired, we are motivated, we are ready to go. Thank you. Next, we'll bring in Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, who currently serves as the scholar in residence at the National Council of Jewish Women. Rabbi Danya, thank you for being with us today and for using your leadership in the Jewish community to propel the abortion justice movement and protect reproductive freedom. We know that Jewish tradition allows and even requires abortion in many cases, including when a mother's health or mental health is at risk. Can you elaborate on just why abortion access is a Jewish value?
Oh, the reasons, let me count the ways. So we can start with the textual piece. First of all, I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me. And it's, to be holding space with these icons is amazing. Textually, our approach to abortion begins in the book of Exodus. We have a case where two men fight. They accidentally knock over a pregnant woman, and she miscarries. If it is only a miscarriage, we pay financial damages. If the pregnant person dies, then it is treated as a case of manslaughter. So causing the death of the fetus is not treated as manslaughter. The fetus is treated as potential life, not actual life. And then we see there are three important Talmudic texts, one from the Mishnah and two from the Talmud, the later strata of the Talmud, if you will. The Mishnah teaches basically a case that if in labor, one basically goes in and very graphically describes, like, you should perform an abortion as long as the fetus baby's head has not emerged. And only when the head has emerged, then do we not push off one life for another. But up until and even in labor, whose rights come first? Whose health comes first? The pregnant person, right? The adult is considered the person whose life is primary and whose needs are primary. And then for us, we die at last breath. And for us, that actualization of coming into the world begins with first breath. And until, then the Talmud says for the first 40 days, the fetus is mere water. That's first 7 to 8 weeks of gestation. The fetus doesn't have that same kind of legal status. That's when 2/3 of abortions happen, by the way. And then for the rest of the pregnancy, the fetus is part of the pregnant person's body. Really, the old slogan, my body, my choice. Literally, the fetus is as the pregnant person's thigh is the Talmudic language. We kind of move away from choice language now because not everybody has a choice and not everybody has the same choices. But the fetus is part of the pregnant person's body. And so then from there, from these Talmudic texts, we jump forward, and I could take you on the whole textual journey, but we go and we see sources that say that, abortion is permitted. This 16th century source says that, to save a pregnant person from woe is okay. Even in the case of as long as you're not in active labor, sure. Right? Like the way we think about abortion now is not how Jews have historically, to save someone from woe. We see that mental health is as important as physical health. We see emotional pain is equivalent to physical pain. We see abortion is not permitted for no reason, but even a thin reason, right? We see again and again and again, like, listen, Judaism is a patriarchal religion, and there are places where we have not done things right by women historically. Women and other people with uteruses, but here we see again and again these textual greats open the barn door and say kind of like, this is permitted in our tradition, come on. And mental health, emotional health, right? Anything you need. We see the language of dignity raised, of preventing suffering. And I cannot think of a case when somebody would not like to be pregnant, but the state forces them to be pregnant, that is not going to cause woe or suffering or mental health problems or emotional pain. So from a Jewish perspective, it is not just that abortion is permitted and sometimes required, but that these bans are a direct infringement on our First Amendment rights. And they are not only a violation of the Establishment Clause by creating, a state religion that has decided when life is starting, that doesn't cohere with when we think life starts, but there are cases where our Jewish law mandates that we would terminate a pregnancy when these bans would say, oh, well, that's, she's not coding on a gurney, so she can't.
Thank you. Thank you, Danya. We're not going to open it up to a larger discussion with a few questions for everyone. So I'll start because I've been thinking a lot about this in recent days. And with Dahlia, we talked about the dissent, but there was one dissenter who was missing, who was sorely missed, whose voice we so dearly missed, who had tzedek tirdof on her walls in the Supreme Court. And I'm just wondering what all of you think Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have said about this decision. Dahlia, we'll start with you.
I think that she's been weaponized, and she is cited in Justice Alito's majority opinion for the proposition that Ginsburg hated Roe v. Wade, and she thought it was incorrectly decided, and it is a really cynical ploy to use her. She was certainly emphatic over the years that she wished that it had been rooted, that Roe and Casey had been rooted in the Equal Protection Clause that I talked about, not in substantive due process, but that's a completely ahistoric wish. The doctrine wasn't there yet in 1973. And so to use her to say that Roe was incorrectly decided is sort of cynical to the point of psychotic. And I think what she would say as a lifelong supporter, not just of abortion, but of women's equality, that the fact that there is immense briefing, and I can commend to folks the amicus briefs in this case from economists, the amicus briefs in this case that talk about the hardship that will befall women and pregnant people who are seeking to enter the workplace in a meaningful way, that this has the knock-on effects for women and equality and health is so acute that the fact that Justice Alito doesn't bother to acknowledge or engage with that data, I think would have affronted her. Maybe the only thing I would say, Haley, just because I think it matters, is that the last big reproductive rights opinion was written by Stephen Breyer, not by Justice Ginsburg in Whole Women's Health in 2016. And I think Ginsburg loved that. I think she loved the fact that a male ally was so solicitous and careful, and in that opinion, scrupulously attentive to women's healthcare needs and women's economic needs. And so I just think that in some sense, the fact that she would have passed the torch and had Justice Breyer speak in a deep and knowledgeable way about why this is a human rights issue, why this is an equality issue, I think she would be really happy to see men entering this fight as equals with women, because without male allies, as Justice Breyer, who just retired 2 hours ago, would tell you, women can't do this alone.
It's a great lesson. We're still learning from Ruth. Yes, Heather.
Though I wouldn't presume to say what Justice Ginsburg would have said, and I certainly defer to Dahlia on that. I was taking notes on what she says so that I can convey some of her insight and knowledge on it. But I do think she would have said it was a shanda. This is a violation. This is never to happen. It's a violation of our tradition, our beliefs, our values. As Jews, as people, as Americans, as people who care about others and believe everyone should have dignity and respect, and we should reflect that anger and that outrage, and then, as she did, put that anger and outrage into action. There is you may have been leading to ask this in another question, but I want to tie it together. As some of you know, acting out of that Jewish faith and tradition, there's a synagogue in Florida that has already sued Governor DeSantis, saying that the current laws in Florida, because it's both the Supreme Court and it's what's going on in the states, that infringes on the freedom of religion for the very kinds of reasons that Rabbi Danya said. And also today, there was a court ruling in Florida, and again, Dahlia knows more about this, that challenged the restrictions in the Florida laws, so that this fight is far from over. And it's up to us to continue the Ginsburg tradition and the tradition that allowed for the passing of Roe, for the precedent of Roe, and to build for justice in the future.
Great. Danya, I don't know if you wanted to add onto that.
I don't know that I have any additional wisdom on what she would have said. This is obviously a violation of her life and legacy. And, I think so often in the contemporary American discourse, I think appropriately we talk about rights, and in Judaism we talk about obligation. And so, I think for us as this is Jewish Dems, and National Council of Jewish Women mobilizes the Jewish community to fight for everybody. We have an obligation to show up and to remember that Justice Ginsburg always held tzedek tzedek tirdof, justice you shall pursue, as her core verse, which makes sense because that was really about the judiciary, right? And the Torah also teaches that when you're going to set up a just society, you center, it reminds us women, widows, orphans, strangers, again and again and again, widows, orphans, strangers. That's ancient intersectionality. That reminds us that even when you're worrying about poverty, you remember that there are people whose gender and marital status, or age and parental status, or national status and access to networks are going to be uniquely they're going to be uniquely vulnerable because of where they are in society, and that we have to always, in our fight for justice, hold the people who are most impacted, right? And to remember that people who are lacking financial resources, BIPOC, right, Black, Indigenous, people of color, are most impacted. Immigrants, young people, right, trans men, and some non-binary people, right, that people in rural communities, that we need to always make sure that in our work and in our organizing, we are always centering those most impacted, and that we are making sure that we are following their leadership and amplifying their voices, and making sure that they are the ones that have the mic, and developing strategy in coalition with them. And I think that all follows the same. That's the work. That's the work.
So as we look at the work and the path ahead, obviously we're looking at legalizing abortion, the state and federal level. It's clear that 12 states and DC already have legislation in place protecting the legal right to abortion. And we know that there was an effort in the House. Now twice they've passed, the Democratic majority in the House passed a law to codify Roe, which has been stalled in the Senate due to the filibuster. What is the path forward when it comes to, at the state level and at the federal level, legalizing abortion access? And I would also add, what more can the Biden administration do, perhaps with executive orders? And we will have Sherice from the White House on shortly. We'll ask her directly, but I'm interested in what you all think the administration should be doing. So we're looking at the state and federal level.
I can start. I think it is incredibly important now to pivot to questions around medication abortion. We know that medication abortion is very, very much going to be the backup, particularly for pregnant people in states that do not have access to services. I think it was really singularly important that right after Dobbs came down, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that because this is an FDA-approved drug, states cannot override federal law. And he further has suggested that the FDA guidance concerning some of the abortion medications could preempt state laws that seek to regulate them. We're going to enter an absolutely unknowable world. This I know for certain about whether you can put into the mails medication abortion, whether you can be on the hook for mailing. There's also First Amendment questions that are unprecedented since the Fugitive Slave Act about whether states can haul someone into court for providing medication abortions or for providing. We're now seeing model federal guidance that would start to prosecute people for speech acts. So for simply giving advice, that kind of stuff has to be bolstered by federal law. There's a whole bunch of things that blue states are, as you've suggested, putting into effect. But in terms of getting WIPA, the Women's Health Protection Act, passed, this goes to Heather's point, which is this is stuck in the Senate for the exact same reason that the voting rights legislation is stuck in the Senate. That is the filibuster. And until we have a very, very meaningful conversation about how it is that 70 to 80% of Americans did not want Roe v. Wade overturned, and that nevertheless they can do nothing to enforce it legislatively on a federal level, I think tells you that one big place we have to start thinking about is the malapportioned Senate, is the Electoral College, and all the ways in which minority rule by a tiny, and in this case, religious inflected minority is overmastering the religious liberties and the reproductive freedom of masses of people who do not want this to be the case.
You should also realize that the Republicans, the far right of the Republican Party, the Republican MAGA faction, who it's also tied in with the whole attacks on our country, the criminal conspiracy to attack our country that happened on January 6th. It's all part of an approach to take this country backwards for the rule of the few and the partisan political interests that they represent, as well as for very specialized religious interests, but not in the interests of all of us. The Republicans have now talked about building on what they see as a victory to go after contraception itself. Just imagine if what happens to women's lives without access to contraception, what happens to children's lives without that? In addition to, you mentioned DC is one of the places that now allows for reproductive freedom. But the DC government is controlled by the federal government. And if the hands of the Senate and the Congress fall into those Republican hands, they are talking about outlawing abortion overall. As well as there are many areas in which they haven't allowed reproductive freedom of expansion of Medicaid abortion and federally funded abortion. So there are different parts of the population who've never had full access because they don't have the financial resources for it. So it really, in part, it is a question of what the president can do. And there are a set of steps. I think Sherice may add to this. I won't go through all of them, but he took steps on HHS to increase access to medication abortion. He's directing the Office of Civil Rights in HHS to ensure patient privacy. He's directing the department to expand it, examine its authority under Emergency Medical Treatment Act to ensure that doctors and hospitals are supported in the treating of pregnant patients. He's directing all agencies to ensure that providers have appropriate training, know how to handle the situations and other issues, including this, I thought, a remarkable statement today to possibly overturning the filibuster. But it is up to us to make that possible. I want to make one more point that in some ways I think is the most important now for the people who are listening. Right now, as I said before, it is a history-making time. It is a dangerous time. We are on a knife's edge about which way we go in this country, democracy or tyranny. Roe is a key example. Many people have become so frightened because of the future that we face, that there's a dispiritedness, a demoralization, maybe even a hopelessness of our core groups. And so we should take heart that Roe itself and other issues are driving a renewed energy. There was just a poll that came out late last week that said, compared to 20% of Republicans, 78% of Democrats said the Supreme Court rule makes them more likely to vote in November. I mention that because there's been an enthusiasm gap between the Democrats and the Republicans. So it is, yes, it is up to the president. Yes, it is up to our elected officials, but really, it is up to us. Do we get people out? Do we engage them? Do we convey the sense of hope and possibility and driving forward? And whether it's the National Council of Jewish Women or this remarkable organization of Jewish Democrats and others around the country, the time to make history is now.
Thank you. Danya.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we need to push, we need to work on all levels, as we've been saying. In terms of the federal government, there are at least 9 things that President Biden can be doing today. And we have a letter at NCJW outlining them and asking people to mobilize and put some pressure. They include appointing a repro freedom czar at the White House that can be working and coordinating a whole government response, right? Directing the FDA to be expanding access to medication abortion, as Dahlia sort of began to indicate, putting out an executive order telling every single federal agency to put in their plans for how they're going to help with abortion access within a month, right? Hey guys, like, get us your plans right now. Obviously he's been pushing on WIPA, which is great, the Women's Health Protection Act. And I'm glad we're finally talking about ending that filibuster. I also want to say that as we talk about the Women's Health Protection Act, which would codify Roe and make abortion access legal, we need to also talk about the EACH Act, which expands access, because rights are only good if everybody can access them. And when we have a right that is only something that people who have money and privilege and many privileges can have access to, which has actually been the case for a long time with abortion, we're not there yet. And so we need also to push for the EACH Act so that low income and particularly women of color can also have equal and fair access to abortion. We need to be talking about the judiciary and not having lifetime appointments for anti-abortion judges to appease Mitch McConnell. I don't know what that's about. Repro health ombudsman, right? Resources through federal agencies. There are a million things that Biden could do today, and we would like to push on that. And then obviously there are state strategies, there are local strategies. There are a million things that can be done. National Council of Jewish Women is working on this. We have a local, a state, a national advocacy strategies that we are rolling out piece by piece. So if you want to be involved in this work, Jews for Abortion Access.org, which is already in the chat, has all sorts of resources for you and places to sign up. But there is much more that can be happening today than is, and that is the bottom line. We need to push those in power right now to do more than just kind of wave their hands and say, guys, I guess you should go vote. We need to go vote, and getting out the vote has got to be a critical piece of our strategy, but there's so much more we can be doing for people right now, and those in power need to show up.
Thank you. Well, speaking of the White House, we are still waiting for Sherice. I have to say that it looks like the White House has figured out how to make Zoom so secure that she's having trouble joining. So the security appears to be intact, but we're still waiting for her to join. But I'm glad that, Heather, that you mentioned the people watching this event, because we currently have well over 300 people who are watching, and we're so thrilled that they're all here. And I've heard from some of them. And so I'm just going to ask a question that I just received because everybody's wondering, specifically Dahlia, what your view is of this. So throwing something at you that came from our audience, and just wondering how you feel. One of the issues and potentially raised to resolve this that has been raised, this isn't the first time, is expanding the size of the Supreme Court. And this is a difficult issue. This is controversial. Do you just continue to expand the court? And of course, it's a hypothetical that who knows how we would even get there. But we are interested. What is your view of this concept of expanding the size of the court?
I mean, to be candid, it's neither controversial nor difficult. And of all the court reform proposals that were examined by the Biden Blue Ribbon Commission on structural court reforms, this is actually the easiest. It does not require a constitutional amendment. It does not require any kind of heavy lifting. It could be done tomorrow. So it is not hard to effectuate. I think the problem is, as you say, there is this massive cognitive jump that needs to happen, and people probably needed 5 years ago when Mitch McConnell held a seat open for 10 months so that Donald Trump could seat someone instead of Barack Obama. This is a conversation we have to be having. And the very notion that we approach it with this trepidation, there are bills that have been put forward to add 4 seats to the court. I think this is one of those things where, and I say this as somebody who was opposed to court expansion for 20 years of my 22-year career, but I now think that, the whole thing is on fire. And I also think that my theory of the court, which was they would modulate their actions in the face of massive public opprobrium, was wrong. They did everything they could do, maximal damage, including today kneecapping the EPA. They massively harmed those of us who believe there should be a wall between church and state, both this week and last week. This court is not going to pump the brakes. And so if we can't be emboldened to have a meaningful conversation, because as both Rabbi Danya and Heather have said, the time is running out. We don't have a ton of time. We are laying down the tracks, hoping that this can get resolved. And I just think if we can't be as bold as the other side has been for 20 years, and that includes having a meaningful conversation about the simple act of adding 4 seats, then I think that everything else we're doing is arranging deck chairs as the thing goes down.
By the way, for people who want to pursue that a little bit, and Dahlia, again, I really defer to you. I'm not the expert on the court, but my impression is the court has been expanded 6 times since its origins, and that there is a precedent to expand it. And there really is a question of just the political will. Again, the 2 more senators and holding the House. So there's a group, Demand Justice, that has made this its priority focus. And but there are many other groups joining in. I just saw a statement from Sierra Club because of the vicious statement that was just the destructive statement to a popular, having a government that can function. That's really what this EPA decision is about. It basically challenges the degree to which a regulatory agency can enforce the laws, can implement the laws. And without that, you have what Rick Scott proposed, which is all laws sunset, including Social Security and Medicare, and you have to repass the law. He says, if it's popular, you'll pass it again. Oh, it's so easy to pass a law like Social Security or Medicare or the Voting Rights Act. And so the courts used to be a source of last resort. We have to make sure that it reflects the popular will. And so I think whatever the specific changes, whether it's certain judges appointed during different presidential tenures, or the numbers that are expanded, I think that a serious conversation about the court reflecting what is morally right, what is the popular will of this country, and what has a basis in the highest visions of a country founded ostensibly for democracy and justice for all.
Thank you. Well, we will no longer speak about it with trepidation. Thank you for that, Dahlia. We will be bold. And we are so glad that we have now been joined by Sherice Perry, who I think is joining us via phone. Sherice, we're sorry we can't see you. Can you confirm that we have you? Okay, I think we have her. We're working on it. Sherice, are you there?
I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you so much, Sherice, for
Fantastic.
joining. Yes, well, at least we know that the cybersecurity is alive and well at the White House. We're glad, but we're glad that you're here. Sherice is the senior advisor to the director of the White House Office of Public Engagement, and she has been working at all levels to ensure that community leaders and organizations like JDCA have the opportunity to inform the work of the president and the administration and ensure that voices are heard and can be translated into action across the administration. So Sherice, for the past 56 minutes, we have been talking about this abhorrent ruling overturning Roe v. Wade and what we can all do about it to protect access to abortion. And we want to hear from you specifically what measures the Biden administration is considering and is ready to take to ensure that abortion rights are protected despite this new ruling. And we should say to ensure not just that abortion rights are protected, but that communities that will be impacted are protected, that we can protect reproductive health care broadly and protect those communities that will be most impacted by this decision.
Oh, absolutely. And first, just thank you so much for having me. I'm so disappointed I can't see your faces and that I can't blow a kiss to my dear friend, Heather Booth. I miss you, Heather. So I'm so disappointed that I couldn't hear the conversation that you all had today. But yes, we have been hard at work since before this decision came down, but would love to share a couple of things with you today that to make sure that you all know what this administration is doing to ensure that women have access to healthcare, right? Because this is about quality healthcare, and that we're doing everything we can to think about all the other rights that are at stake. So on Friday, you know, the president and the attorney general made two things really clear. The first thing was that the administration was going to defend a woman's right to travel from her home to a state that allows abortion. And if, you know, there's an elected official that tries to interfere with a woman exercising this right, the administration was going to do everything in its power to fight that attack. Second, the president said that the administration would protect access to medications that are approved by the FDA. That's things like contraception and mifepristone, you know, which the FDA approved well over 20 years ago to safely end an early pregnancy. And as many people know, is commonly used to treat miscarriages. You know, in fact, it's the gold standard, right? When someone who's experiencing the gold standard when someone who's pregnant is experiencing a miscarriage, which we know is all too real for too many people, right? I'm sure that this is not something that's happened to you. You surely know someone who has. So let me tell you, that was last Friday. Let me tell you what's happened this week. On Tuesday, the HHS secretary announced that the department was going to do 5 things. The first was to take steps to increase access, right, to medication abortion. So right now, federal law requires that HHS programs provide medication abortion in limited circumstances, including the life of the mother, rape, and incest. So the department is going to work to ensure that all federally supported programs and services are complying and providing this under the law. Second, the Office of Civil Rights within HHS is going to work to ensure patient privacy. We know that that is an issue. That is a very real issue for patients and providers, right? So they're going to work to ensure patient privacy and non-discrimination for patients seeking reproductive health care and the providers that offer that care. Third, the department is going to examine its authority under EMTALA, which I know a lot of you are familiar with, the Emergency Medical Treatment Act, to ensure that clinical judgment of doctors and hospitals is supported in treating pregnant patients, right? We want doctors to be able to do what they were trained to do, which is treat and counsel their patients. So that includes, patients who are experiencing pregnancy loss or complications, and reaffirming that abortion care can be appropriate to stabilize a patient. Fourth, the secretary is going to direct all the agencies at HHS to ensure that providers have the appropriate training and resources to handle family planning needs. That's going to include pharmacists and clinics. We know that now patients are going to need more referrals for care, and they're going to need help navigating this new reality. So, and that stuff takes time. So we're really trying to make sure that we're building in some margin for that. And then last, the secretary directed CMS to take every legally available step that they could to protect family planning care. So, including emergency contraceptives and contraception like IUDs, and making sure that CMS is making it clear with family planning providers that they're particularly in their Medicaid program. Just a couple of other things, the Attorney General and the Justice Department is going to really work to ensure that states, may not ban medication abortion based on a disagreement with the FDA about its use. We have a new website up. I encourage everybody to visit it. It's called reproductiverights.gov, where you'll find information about birth control, health insurance, other services, et cetera. And then yesterday, because we know that so many people are concerned about privacy, the HHS Office of Civil Rights issued new guidance to help patients to protect their privacy. So first, the guidance addresses how the federal law and regulations protect individuals' private medical information, making it clear that providers are not required to disclose private medical information to third parties, and then addresses the extent to which private medical information is protected on personal cell phones and tablets. Because we know that a lot of people, whether it's a period tracker or a tracker to help you get pregnant or some other, there's so many things that women are using nowadays, and all that information is on the phone. So we've got some guidance there. And then, you all probably covered this today, but the president has made clear the only way to secure a woman's right to choose is if Congress does so, right, and makes this a federal law. And today he expressed his support for a filibuster carve-out for that kind of legislation. So more to come. We'll have some additional announcements later this afternoon from HHS. So stay tuned, because we are doing everything that we can to explore every avenue possible to make this to ensure that women have access to the care that they need.
Thank you, Sherice. Well, we're glad to hear it. That was quite the list, and we're so proud to support these efforts and everything that this administration is doing, and more. We look forward to that list growing in the coming days and weeks. In closing, and we've had over 300 people join this call, I'd like to pose to each of you, and it's fine if we've gone over some of these issues before, but what message you want to leave with members of our JDCA community in terms of actions that we can all take to defend abortion rights and access to reproductive health care. We'll start with you, Sherice.
Oh, well, thank you, and thank you for having me today. Faith leaders, the faith community has just been so integral in so many movements over time. So, we know that this is going to take all of us, right? This is a collective effort. So we're going to continue to look to you all to continue raising your voices, making a moral case for these rights. So many of you are connecting your communities to social services and educational resources. we're going to need you to continue doing that. And, you know, we're also going to need you to continue mobilizing your members, right? The members of your communities, to make sure that your voices are heard, you know, whether it's the city level, state level, making sure that you have representation that, that reflects your values. So thank you for the work that you do, and thank you all for your incredible partnership. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sherice. Next time we hope to see you, but we were very glad to hear you. Thank you. And Dahlia.
You know, the two things that I think we've talked about, but I would re-up, state and local elections. This is your state attorney general. This is your governor. This is all the races really around the country that our side has kind of been on snooze about. And speaking of being on snooze, I think the most essential thing is not to go off for 4th of July weekend and just bat this down and say, well, that sucked, but you know, maybe someone else will sort it out. I think this is now a lesson in how we all have to, you know, do the democracy reform work. That is just the only way, I think, to really grab back majority power. The other thing is just to go to what Rabbi Danya said. I think as Jews, we are positioned in such a beautiful and deep way to center not just us, but to center the widow and the orphan and the stranger and the suffering. We know how to do that. That's the sort of very, very heart of Tikkun Olam. And I think now is the moment to say that if you were Black in Mississippi, you never had a right under Roe v. Wade. You might have had a paper right, but you couldn't make it happen. And now that's visible to everyone. And I think it's a deeply, deeply Jewish notion that the work begins by seeing the suffering of others and helping to lift us all up.
Thank you. Danya.
So get involved in Jewish Dems, right? They're going to help us move us on the work of this election, which is critical, right? State, local, federal, all of it. Get involved with JewsForAbortionAccess.org. We have the advocacy tools, we have the education tools, we have the pastoral tools, because 1 in 4 people who can get pregnant will have an abortion. And there are people who need love and care now, and they are in your community, and we need to destigmatize. And get involved with and donate, right? Donate your money to the Jewish Fund for Abortion Access, to your local abortion fund. People need your money. And if you want to be doing hands-on work, find your local abortion justice organizations, your local repro advocacy organizations, reproductive justice organizations. Figure out who near you is already doing work and find out how you can add capacity. Right? There are people who have been working towards this moment for a really long time. Get involved with your local NCJW chapter, right? Our sections have been working towards this moment. We've been preparing. The people in the repro field have been preparing. We don't need people reinventing the wheel. We just need you to show up and say, how can I have money, I will donate it. I have web skills, I will, whatever, I have this, we just need you to help.
Hey, I think Rabbi Danya, we just lost you, but I will pick up on that as well. Also, Heather Booth had to leave us a few minutes ago, so we want to thank her and all of our participants and our panelists for joining us today. We hope you learn more about this critically important issue and that you are inspired to take action. Conversations like this one are crucial for our community to stay informed on the issues that matter the most to Jewish Democrats. And we encourage you to visit jewishdems.org to learn more about our upcoming programs, how to support JDCA, how to become a member, and where you can sign up to volunteer in one of our 15 state chapters. Because between now and November, we will need all of you and more. We are going to be mobilizing 1.9 million Jewish voters where it matters the most to electing pro-choice Democrats. And we're going to need everyone's help to make sure we can expand our majority in the Senate and the House, but especially the Senate. We talked about that today in order to once and for all get rid of the filibuster and codify the protections offered by Roe. We hope you will also consider giving to an abortion fund, which allows women in need to access funds for abortion care and affiliated expenses having to do with travel. The National Council for Jewish Women, which Rabbi Danya was just talking about, has created a Jewish fund for abortion access, which is collecting donations. We encourage you to support these efforts as well as others in your area. And as we close out today's program, we want to remind everyone there is hope and we do have a choice. We have a choice in November between Democrats who want to ensure our rights and Republicans who want to take them away. And we all know what to do. So with that, I want to wish everyone an early Shabbat Shalom, happy July 4th, and may we turn our outrage into activism and our voices into votes that matter in November. And thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time. Especially thank you to our panel. Thanks.